Hey everyone, Scott here on just after my teaching. It's the Afterthoughts and just some things that I would just want to, after the teaching, just elaborate a little further maybe and just give you something to think about, something to wrestle through maybe. That's the whole point of this. And so today's teaching, although it was a standalone simply because this is the last day before I head out on my sabbatical. But I wanted to leave you with a question that I felt the Lord has given to me, and that's to what lengths would you go to be known as my disciple? Because I've been thinking deeply about what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Like, what does it really mean? Like, what is Jesus really asking of us? Not what we have thought it means, but Jesus, define it for us. And as I've been sitting in with the Gospels and just what the passage I used today from Luke 14, starting at verse 26 there down through to 35, that whole thing of what's labeled as the cost of being a disciple. And if you take that seriously, it comes across as heavy. And now Jesus uses some exaggeration when he says that by comparison, you must hate everyone else if you're going to follow me and be my disciple. And what Jesus is meaning there is that we put God above all other relationships, is what he's talking about. There's this neat little thing about in the Hebrew, but in the Middle Eastern culture, if you loved somebody, if I love this person here, but I love this person over here more, it was considered I hate that person. So it was this whole thing of loving more. And so there's some scholars that say that's what Jesus was getting at when he uses the word hate, because we're not called to hate other people. Definitely not called that. All that to say, I think that the whole church throughout North America is looking at this whole thing of being a disciple and having to rethink what it means to follow Jesus, because we've gone off, something has gone sideways somewhere, and we don't quite know what. It's like we see, it's like there's a lot of people following, a lot of people going to church, but the roots aren't deep. Trouble comes and it just like things go awry. And I think the church is being called. So I think all of this, what's going to come of all this, is that it's going to be good. I think church is going to look different. I don't think it's going to look the way it does right now. And I think there's going to be a deepness. I'm curious about what it's doing to the younger generation, because they're the ones that are going to be leading the church. And I'm really curious about it. But here's the thing I want you to even just ponder and think about. I think the Western church is going to have a lot of repenting to do. And I'm not talking about just the, individually, but I'm talking about the church as a whole. This week in the news here in Canada, we saw what took place in BC when at one of a former residential school, where the remains of 215 children were found buried. From those days of when we had the residential schools. And it's this whole thing, you start to question the British colonization, the British Empire, and the church played a critical piece in that, where we went to other lands to spread the gospel, but how we treated people and how we looked upon other people who weren't white, things are starting to come out. Like in so many areas, things are coming out. And the church, the white evangelical church, has to take a step back and really re-examine itself. What I feel one of the things we're going to have to do is that what's found in the Sermon on the Mount, I think it's in chapter 7, beginning of chapter 7, where Jesus talks about don't judge. That Before you start to take the speck out of somebody else's eye, you need to take the log out of your own. And I think we're going to have to start taking the log out of our own. Think about it deeply. Think about how the church, when it comes to the residential schools, church was very involved. Now we can say, well, that wasn't my denomination. Well, that was the church. That was the church. That's who led a lot of those schools. What do we do with that? We have to rethink how we see people. We have to rethink what it means to go and spread the gospel around the world, and how we see other people and how we see other traditions. By that, I just mean other cultures, how people operate. So my challenge to you is to take that passage from Luke 14, verse 26 down to 35. Think it through. How does that apply to your life? I'm thinking, how does it apply to my life? We have a lot of rethinking to do, or repenting, but it's all for the best. It's for our health, for the health of the church. So I leave those thoughts with you, and I probably won't do another Afterthoughts until sometime in September. So until then, blessings to you, and may Jesus continue to challenge you, prod you, and may you also come to know the depth of God's love for you. And God loves you dearly. Until then, bless you guys. Thank you.